let's take a look at what these guys are facing over here on your customer side so we can determine what our obligations are to provide to them. So when we look at IT and consumer electronics, you're going to get information from them that, hey, we expect you to provide us data because we need to meet the EU RoHS directive, right? We need to meet EU REACH SV8C declaration requirements. And also, by the way, there's this new SCIP database that we need to load a whole bunch of detailed information, and we don't have it. So please give it to us, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means later, right? So we have this coming from them. We have the EU POPs regulation is becoming more and more prevalent and more on the radar of these IT and consumer electronics companies because of enforcement. California Prop 65 is becoming a hot item with the IT and consumer electronics producers. And so as a result of all this expanding and changing, they're going to ask you for full material declaration. And a lot of times we are unable to provide that. Hopefully we are. But in some cases, those full material declaration are going to have proprietary or trade secret substances we can't disclose. And so in that case, they're going to ask us, well, since there's gaps in your FMD, please give us an IEC 62474 declarable substance list declaration, right? So this is IEC 62474 is the declarable substance list for the electronics industry as a whole. So regardless of what they're willing to accept, this is what they need to comply with. Now we look at our automotive customers, they're going to take a look at some of this is going to be applicable to them and some of them is not. When we look at the automotive customers, we see, well, the EU RoHS, they're out of scope for that. They don't care about RoHS, but they do care about REACH. They do care about POPs. They may or may not care about California Prop 65, depending on their processes and where these components are located in the car. And then, again, they're still going to want FMD from you. But if there's any kind of gaps in that FMD, like proprietary substances, then they're not going to want the IEC 62474 from you. They're actually going to want the GADSL, which is the declarable substance list for the automotive industry, okay? And so if you're going to provide some FMD with proprietary substances, you'll also need to provide them with a GADSL declaration and also information on ELV exemptions, because remember, they're not subject to the RoHS requirements, but they are subject to the ELV directive, which has its own exemptions listed. So we're going to need to provide that information as well. We get into the medical devices, and there's been a new recast of the medical device regulation. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But now these companies who in the previous days were not necessarily concerned about these kinds of substances being present in the parts and materials they're sourcing, they now are, because of some requirements to disclose or justify the use of CMR or EDS compounds within the products in certain cases, and to disclose latex and animal human-derived substances. Now we say, okay, well, I make ICs, so this really doesn't matter to me. That is true, but if you make any kind of components that could be considered in contact with the human body, then you may be concerned to be asked for this information. And then finally, there's other regulations that these guys are facing as well. So the MEPC 269 on ships is a good example, as is the EU regulation on maritime. And what this requires is that we have an inventory of hazardous substances. There's restrictions on certain substances which cannot be used. There's an SDOC process, which anybody who provides any kind of equipment to a new ship maker must provide an inventory and a declaration on the substance content. And so if your components are to be used in those kind of environments, then you need to pay attention to those requirements too. So we have a situation here where we see that we're trying to source these components to makers of products in different industries, and the amount of industries that are implementing electronic devices in them is growing. And so the problem for us as electronic components manufacturers is that we can't just select one of these and say we only provide resistors to iPhones, but we are not going to sell them to the automotive world or the medical world, right? Because there's too much overlap. So what happens is that these requirements that we've just listed become our requirements. So we have a much broader scope of requirements to address than any of our customers do. And that's important for us to understand that when we put our process together.
Learn more by viewing the full-length video online at greensofttech.com/videos. Plus, learn about our environmental regulation solutions online at greensofttech.com.